We have a big show for you today. Immediately, I wanted to get into one of the best movie experiences I think I've seen in a long time. I know we talk a lot about movies. We just saw The Fall Guy, but I saw that video on demand. This time I went to the theater, and we've chronicled that many times on this podcast, my difficulties with the state of current movie theaters and what you kind of have to endure whenever you go there and how the experience has gotten bad. But I decided to kind of brave it once more and go to the theater to see a movie that I did not think would have the emotional impact that this movie had on me. And if you don't know what I'm talking about If, the movie written by and I believe directed by John Krasinski. I got to look that up. But it's written by John Krasinski. It's a film. It's definitely being presented as a film by John Krasinski, who played Jim Halpert in The Office. You might know him from Jack Ryan on Amazon Prime. But clearly a famous enough actor to kind of, to go see a movie just for at this point. He's been in the zeitgeist for quite a long time. But this movie was kind of marketed as a kid's movie, right? This is right off the bat. Let me see if I can pull the trailer up here for you guys. This movie looks and very much feels like a kid's movie. John Krasinski kind of went on to say in a lot of press tours that this is a kid's movie through and through. It was written for his kids. And the premise is essentially about imaginary friends, right? Which, right off the bat, I think that, you're going to assume, okay, this is directed towards kids. It's going to be a kid's movie. It might have some adult jokes in it, but there might be some hesitation in going to a movie like this in theaters because you might end up in the situation that I was in. As the oldest person in the theater going to see this movie, you're like, you just gear up for what you're going to experience, right? You've been through enough animated features or illumination features, DreamWorks features, enough to realize that this movie's probably not going to have that much impact for you. I couldn't be more wrong. This movie, which stars Ryan Reynolds, John Krasinski, and I gotta find her name, but she was in The Walking Dead for a long time. Great performances by them. That basically goes through the premise of when kids start losing their imaginary friends, what the imaginary friends emotionally go through when they depart from their children. And the premise in the movie basically goes through this girl, B, which is played by Kaylee Fleming. That's her name. Kaylee Fleming does an absolutely wonderful job playing the main character of this. B and a mysterious character called Cal basically go on a mission trying to reunite kids with new imaginary friends, and then end up in a process where they are reuniting older kids with their old imaginary friends. It's a very, very interesting and original premise that I think we haven't really explored before. And John Krasinski on press tours went on to say that this is based on a true story of seeing his own kids that he has with his wife, Emily Blunt, kind of lose that imaginary friend, lose that ability to kind of like conjure up those imaginary moments in your life and to have that play, that fun. This movie, if you look at it from a wholesale perspective, really good. It emotionally, what they don't tell you about this movie, because the marketing is very much kid friendly, they show those imaginary friends, they show those characters. You think it's going to be something very, very light. It is not. It will emotionally rip your heart out. It is ready right from the start. The first 45 seconds, everybody mentions the first about 4 minutes of Up as being one of the most emotional moments in animation history, where you're just not ready for a movie that cute looking, a movie that light looking, to be that dark in the beginning and to really kind of hit home with you, because I don't think people are probably assume that kids movies are willing to go into that territory. In this movie, you're starting right at the hospital. That's like, one of the opening scenes of this movie is a daughter dealing with not only the loss of her mother, but also the potential loss of her father, which is not something that I expected. And immediately, while sitting in the movie, I was kind of a little bit more worried about whether this was. It was like, is this really a kids movie? This doesn't seem like a kids movie, and it takes a while for it to get going. I think that's one of the things that even though this movie is very, very positive on my personal rating scale, I think this is one of the better movies I've seen. The beginning is a little bit slow. There is a little bit of there's a lot of voiceover. There's a lot of like setup. There's a lot of exposition. But boy, does it pay off in a grand way and kind of hit you emotionally. Now, I don't think the kids will notice this moment. Maybe they do, but there are these reckoning moments that I'll call them that will hit you emotionally in places that you don't expect. Right? That there's especially a moment between one of the characters played by Steve Carell. The imaginary friend Blue, which is that purple monster-like thing, that he deals with somebody struggling with his job and struggling with being confident. I think these are really orchestrated well in a way that has a mix of comedy, but also balances the drama of the moment in a really good way, to the point where I started to cry in the theater. I mean, it's a very interesting juxtaposition when you're at my age, and you're with a bunch of friends watching this movie, and you feel like you start getting that like unsteady breathing because you're gonna start blubbering in the theater about the emotional themes happening in the movie. That's where I was. I was at the 4 minutes of Up. After the 4 minutes of Up, the emotional state I was in then, that's where I was in that pivotal emotional moment in the middle of the film. Now, if you've seen it, you probably know what I'm talking about. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it does a really good job balancing that comedy and balancing that emotional moment, almost like The Office did. And like Greg Daniels is very much credited in The Office for presenting a comedy, but balancing the comedy with emotional moments so that the comedy actually meant something. I think that's one of the more important things about that show that made that show so significant. If you didn't have Jim and Pam's love story in the middle of The Office, you wouldn't have The Office. It wouldn't be as important as it was, right? And I think John Krasinski inherently knows that. You can kind of tell how close he was with The Office. Just in the press for this movie alone, they called back an old Jim prank on Dwight, where he replaced himself with an actor to promote this film. So they know a lot of people will hear the name Steve Carell, John Krasinski, and think The Office and go, right? So in a way, they weren't even marketing to kids at that point. They were marketing to the adults that watch The Office and love that duo. And of course, that was one of the main reasons I wanted to go. Steve Carell, John Krasinski together again? Perfect. Sign me up. I was shocked about how good this movie was and how emotional this movie goes. Like, once it starts getting into the emotional heart of this movie, it just keeps knocking you on your butt every 5 seconds. And it wraps up in a happy way. So it's a very, very well-made movie. I want to also kind of talk about, before we move on to anything else, the visual aspect of this movie is astonishing. Now, we're starting to see the production of very fine 3D work in these movies, and very, very incredible visuals. I mean, 3D implementation into live action that we haven't seen before. This is not Who Framed Roger Rabbit types, superimposing anymore. This is truly like, it looks like it's living there. They go through a gamut of imaginary friends, which I believe that they showed in pre-release for the movie, and the characters are all celebrity voices too. I think George Clooney's in this, Blake Lively's in this. A lot of different people are showcased in this movie. But the creative characters and the off the wall characters, including a marshmallow that's on fire, including a glass of water that's an ice cube that lives in Arizona, they are just these little ideas that are perfect for this movie. It really reminds me of when a comedian writes down a joke in a notebook and he doesn't know what to do with that joke until something fits and they put it in here. That's what it feels like all these imaginary friends are. They're like, oh, remember that old joke that we had? Let's slide it in here. Oh, remember this old joke? Let's slide it in here. Like a Nintendo-like approach. They always talk about Nintendo never letting go of an idea, even if they had it 10 years later, because they know somewhere along the line they're going to use it. That's what this movie feels like. Along with some visual moments, too, that I wanted to highlight was something that kind of shocked me. There are two moments in this film specifically that I wanted to call out because I had never... I'm honestly confused about how they made it happen. And one was, there's a moment where Ryan Reynolds' character, Cal, basically jumps out of a painting and goes from fake visual, obviously CGI in the painting, to real, and they transition it seamlessly. And that was one of the things that I was looking at going, wow, that's a beautifully visual trick. And there's also, in the same vein in that scene, he starts knocking over paintings, and you can see elements in the painting transform into real life. I mean, I think with a movie like last week when we talked about The Fall Guy, you're talking about amazing practical stunts. You're talking about things that happen in real life, and they're making them happen in real life. It's not generated by computer mostly, right? I imagine that they probably put stuff around it in post to kind of make it a little bit more moody, if you will, right? There's rarely a piece of film that's probably not affected by post-production in some way, whether it be by the color or whether it be by, quick editing or whatever. This one is the exact opposite. Go see it for the advancement in computer generation and computer art, because it's unbelievable what they're doing. And some of these sequences, including that sequence that I'm referencing where he runs through an imaginary friend retirement home, if you will, is one of the most grandiose moments in the film. It actually was the moment in the film where I said, oh, this is a kid's film. It's got enough action. It keeps everybody going. Because before that, in the theater, I think you could feel the vibe of like, man, the kids are starting to lose interest because there's a lot of exposition in the beginning. And then from that moment on, it keeps on going and going and going and going and going. So this movie, great movie to see. I emotionally, again, I'm comparing it to Up because that was the... it reminded me of just how emotionally destroyed you are after watching the first 4 or 5 minutes of Up, where the husband and wife go through basically a lifetime of problems and trouble, and it really hits you hard. At the end of this movie, there was not a dry eye in the place, and I know that's a cliche, but that's how it felt, right? It was And to be honest, I'm not that embarrassed about crying in a theater. I think that's what the movies are supposed to do. They're supposed to elicit an emotional response, right? They're supposed to, do that to you, right? If they're hitting really well, if they're written really well, and I think that's a testament to how well this is written, how well this was made, and aside from the only negative being kind of a slow start, I think this film is a perfect film to see, and what a good lineup that we have. So go see If, the movie by John Krasinski. And you're going to have a good time. And tell me what you think about it and put some comments below about how you feel about the movie. I'm telling you, it was an emotional journey, an emotional gauntlet getting through this movie. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back talking about the book, The Yankee Way, and talking about Across the River in Metsland in Old Queens. We've got some drama that probably shouldn't be drama coming up next on the Powell Not Found podcast.